And for more on this, we are once again joined by Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. Dan, you have a background with the AP that dates back as far back as anyone can remember. And we see the critical need to express the moral axis of this war, because you see so few cases where it's obvious the savagery of one side and the restraint that is often put on the other, something that was once again reiterated by President Joe Biden at this meeting, something that's playing out in boardrooms across media outlets around the world right now in the aftermath of that strike in Gaza on that hospital by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Ultimately, this moral axis, how much is this going to play into what we see happening over the coming weeks ahead?
It can be critical unless there is an understanding in the world that we're looking at an absolute global historic singularity where almost any means are justifiable in order to achieve your ends. It's interesting to me that Biden, again, very publicly and prominently mentioned ISIS, just as the German chancellor mentioned the Nazis. You know, I was involved in the coverage as Middle East editor of AP of the effort to dislodge ISIS from Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria and other cities. And once there was a crossing of the Rubicon leading to an understanding, or at least a conviction, that ISIS simply had to be removed come what may, then the gloves really were kind of off. I mean, I can't address the morality of it. I don't know if it's right. I just know that it's true that the Americans in the coalition were willing to take action that led to the deaths of probably around 10,000 civilians in Mosul who didn't vote for Islamic State, even if some of them might have supported it. So it's certainly a factor. I listened to Ambassador Oren talk about how the Israelis, many of them, don't distinguish between the Gazans and Hamas. I would hope he's wrong. And in my own assessment, living here as well, I think he is. There is anger in Israel, more than anger, rage, an absolute burning rage at the savagery and butchery and barbarity that we saw. But I think Israelis, by and large, understand that the 2-point-something million people of Gaza are also, in a way, hostages of Hamas. It's true that a majority of Gazans voted for Hamas in parliamentary elections in 2006, and that was not their finest moment. But that has very little to do with support for Hamas being the executive authority in Gaza today. I mean, I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I would bet Hamas would be thrown out of power if there was a free election in Gaza today. So I think Israel does absolutely have a wide open berth to taking action to remove Hamas from power if it can in Gaza. I think if Israel ends up taking out 50,000 Hamasniks in Gaza, I think even that wouldn't shock too many people in the world. But to kill thousands of civilians that are not involved is another matter altogether. As I say, not without precedent, given the war against Islamic State that America itself led, but highly problematic. And if I look at what Biden is really saying with his presence here and with the 2 carrier groups parked just off coast, basically, which is really 2 spectacular statements. Yeah, it's support, understanding, and a genuinely heartfelt feeling of being by Israel's side, and of a moment that is global historic. But it's also a bit of a bear hug, with the Americans so intimately involved in the planning, with Blinken going over actual plans, with Biden here in person, undoubtedly with his teams getting into details about what Israel plans. I think alongside all the sympathy that's being expressed, there are going to be hard questions about whether Israel really is prepared for the savagery of a ground invasion, for the complexities of an occupation of Gaza, if it came to that, and maybe primarily whether it's wise for Israel to go in there with guns blazing and tanks rumbling to achieve an outcome that may be not a punishment to Hamas and Iran, but perhaps a reward, because certainly their strategic goal is to prevent peace with Saudi Arabia to maximize mayhem in Palestine, to cause contagion in West Bank and Hezbollah. And if you look at two options, invade Gaza or don't invade Gaza, I'm pretty sure that the former, invade Gaza, makes it more likely for Iran to achieve its strategic ends, which are to create mayhem in the Middle East and send the whole region aflame. So these are complicated questions. And I think Israel needs to keep in mind that rage, righteous rage, can clarify, sure, but it can also be an extremely poor counsel.
It's a very interesting conundrum that you just detailed there, Dan.